This is your average Japanese bench chisel called an Anaya Nomi. This is a slightly larger Japanese chisel called a Tataki Nomi. This is not your average Japanese chisel, and this is called an Anaya Nomi. These things are big. Konnichiwa everyone. Today we are going to get this guy tuned up. These are very amazing chisels. These have a very cool history to them, and they're huge. I'm going to talk about the size quite a bit, I think. No jokes there. These are very cool chisels, and they have quite the illustrious history in Japan. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to get this guy cleaned up. It's got some corrosion there, probably from sitting in a tool roll for a couple decades, but it shouldn't take too much to get it back to working order. Got a fresh handle on there. We're going to do a little bit of setup on that as well, get that hoop mushroomed out. Or not the hoop, the handle part. So one little weird thing about this is actually the owner's name, and that says Takai. This, I think, is the maker's mark or a wholesaler's mark, and it says Motodai. And on the back here, it says Tokyo. So this is actually a Tokyo-made chisel, and if you didn't know, there's a little bit of Japanese chisel trivia for you. In the city of Miki, where they make a lot of chisels and there's a lot of blacksmiths, they actually grind the ferrule and the chisel handle flush. However, if a chisel was made in Tokyo, they don't do that. So this chisel, just by looking at the way that this attaches to the blade here, was definitely not made in Miki, it was made in Tokyo. And it's just a little thing you can kind of do whatever you want with there. But anyway, let's get the sharpening stones out and let's get to work on this guy. Well, you know what, before we do that, let's do a little size comparison here. So just for a reference of the visual variety, that is a 12-inch ruler between these two here. So that means that the Anaya is probably 15, maybe 16 inches long. For geometrical types, that's a lot. But it's a pretty sizable piece. I'm probably going to make a box just for it and maybe some of these other large guys I've got here now. But it's going to be kind of fun working with this thing. It took a man to use this chisel. So we do have a good bit of pitting right here on the Ura, and I'm not too worried about it because as this goes back, I'm going to be able to tap out the edge there. But it is active rust because it is orange, so I'm going to go over this with a wire brush and just grind off as much of that as I can. And I'm doing that for a few reasons, because if you didn't know, when things are rust causes expansion on metal. Just look up a couple of images of bridges being cracked by rusted stuff and you'll know what I'm talking about. And it also is going to make this a little bit smoother to use because we don't want anything on here. You honestly don't have to sharpen the whole back of a Japanese chisel. I've seen a lot of Western guys do that, where they'll do the entire thing front to back. And what my teacher has always taught me to do is to only sharpen the front portion of this, flatten the front portion of this, because this is where the most contact with the wood is made. So if this isn't flat, you'll have problems, but honestly the wood doesn't usually make contact all the way back here, so it doesn't have to be perfectly flat. If it's perfectly flat, you're going to have to grind through like almost all of that. I'm not sure why people do that all the time, but difference of opinion, difference of methodology. But I'm also going to take the wire brush and I'm going to get rid of some of this pitting. It's not really pitting, it's just rust, but we're going to get rid of that as well. And so, after I got a little bit of that surface stuff off, I'm just going through with a very fine file and just breaking up some of this tough stuff and get it off one little bit at a time. Alright, well that's a definite improvement. It's much smaller than it was before. Now we're going to take this to the stones and see what we can do about this edge here. It's really not that bad. I mean, the angle's pretty good. Just the thing, I don't really ever measure angles on chisels. I mean, if it chips, I bring it up. If it doesn't, I bring it down. Just kind of a dance between the two. So let's get the stones out, see what we can do on this guy, and I'm going to talk about the history of this a little bit. So while I'm sorting out the edge on this thing, I wanted to take a little bit and talk about the history of this particular tool. Back after World War II, there was a great need for new houses to be built, seeing as most of them had been destroyed by Allied bombing during the war. And so they hired on carpenters called Anaya carpenters. And one thing too, I'm not exactly sure on the pronunciation for this tool. It could be Anaya or Anaya. If you speak Japanese and you know how to say that, leave a comment down below. Anyway, back to the history lesson. There was a great need for new houses to be built. And so Anaya carpenters were hired to cut large mortise holes in construction frame timber. Oh yeah, that's looking good right there. And that's just what they did day in and day out. They would show up to the job site with a large lunchbox, a large hammer, and their chisel, and you know, that was life. So they had to be very accurate, because if you mess up one part of the frame, then you're going to screw the entire thing up. Everything could be out of square and so on and so forth. Let's see what's the best way to do this. I've been experimenting with ways actually holding this while it's being sharpened because it is just so big. So these tools are very valuable if you're doing any kind of large work, as they are very capable of doing some very powerful things. And I'm going to experiment with this one. I don't do timber framing, but I do have a couple of things in mind for future projects that this will probably come in handy on. Getting there. The steel is actually not too bad. Kind of like it. And so that's the history of the Anaya Carpenter and what they did. So their chisels are typically very hard to find. You're not going to see them that often on places like Fleabay. So if you want something like this, you'll have to talk to someone who knows what they're doing. In general, they're just very large, very powerful chisels with very long necks, and they are designed for making very deep mortises. One thing you could do as well, if you were so inclined, was you could pop the handle off, pop them on a longer handle, and you could use it as a paring chisel because it's got enough space on there that wouldn't be too hard to do. It depends on your situation and what you want to do. They're just kind of square already, actually. But yeah, that's a brief history of the Anaya chisel. I'm kind of excited about getting this thing used because this is going to be a really, really nice addition to the toolbox. So that weird discoloration in the middle, there's probably a low spot from where it was ground on a bell grinder or something at some point, but I'm not going to worry too much about it because the edge is getting there. Almost as sharp as I like it. I'm also going to leave this up here like that because it's really not worth the time to grind back that metal, because as long as the edge is square, which you can kind of see it's pretty square with the body there, that's really all that matters, especially on a chisel like this. I mean, you're not doing anything super fine with it. Oh yeah, check that out. Got a nice shine on there. Good and sharp to the touch. Also touched up the back a little bit. What's going on there? Like a glove. Not bad. Let's get this thing mushroomed out and see what we can do. One thing I've picked up is that you can use kind of the edge of your hammer here, just kind of break up those fibers to get a good mushroom going. Got a nice little 4x4 here, which was kindly paid for by the patrons, and you guys know who you are. You guys are awesome. Could not do this without you. And of course, every large chisel needs a nice large hammer with which to drive it. This is a truck. Truck's pretty heavy, pretty big. You can just get an idea of the size of that thing. This thing's probably in the 650, maybe 700 gram range. So for a nice little test, since these were traditionally used to cut mortises and piss off the neighbor's dogs apparently, we're going to cut ourselves a mortise on this side, and we're going to link it with a mortise on this side, or we're going to try to anyway. You know, just a little proof of concept, just channel my best Anaya and see what we can come up with. So in all likelihood, this is probably much smaller than a beam that your regular Anaya would have used, but it's what I got, and it's what I can afford to fit on my apartment balcony, so it's going to have to make do with what we have. Just going to randomize some measurements here. That'll do. Oh yeah, that's going to be easier by a long shot. I may not be the best at cutting mortises, but you gotta learn somewhere. This thing's got some power to it. One thing I will say, that length makes a big difference when you're trying to lever out, lever, when you're trying to get chips out of there like that. Really adds a lot of force to what you're doing. Just like that. Alright, I think we're deep enough with this one that we can finish it out on the other side. We can always trim it up a little bit later, but yeah, that's a pretty decent mortise. I'm happy with that. My mortise cutting skills are not what they could be, so every bit of practice is good. So now that I've gone through most of this on this side, I've got all that long grain available to me there. I'm just kind of push that out, pop it out on the corner. Yeah, the actual power behind this thing, oh, that is invigorating to say the least. Of course, I wouldn't want to be the guy that had to use this all day, every day, as a job, but for the occasional user, it's actually pretty cool. There we go. Now what we got to do is just trim this up a little bit. It should be a done deal. So since we kind of screwed up the corner here just a bit, let's kind of cheat, hide our mistake there. There we go. That's something I picked up. If you really want to get good at something, buy a bunch of pine and do it over and over and over and over again. Pine or Doug fir, whatever you can get your hands on, is great for learning because it will show you every single mistake you make. A good example of it showing your mistakes is right here. There's not really a way to hide those. That's just where I marked the wrong width. So gotta live with it. Just gotta keep going. Well, that is a done deal with that particular joint. That was a pretty fun little test of that, actually. Just two mortises that meet up. And little hairs right there, that's gonna bug me, but I'll deal with it later. But that was some good practice, actually. This thing seriously has got some awesome power behind it. It's definitely a combination of the weight, the steel. I'm a very happy camper with that right now. Plus a good strong hammer makes a big difference in the long run. You know, big chisel needs a big hammer. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. That was a really fun little project, actually. This is going to be a steady user for me in some upcoming projects, I hope, if the wife doesn't see the bill for some of the wood that we're going to get. Thanks for joining me for this little afternoon project. Hope you guys have an awesome day. Big thank you to the patrons on Patreon. They are the ones that's provided this awesome 4x4, and I'm going to be using for some other projects as well. You guys are awesome, and I can't do what I do without you guys. As always, have an awesome day. Arigatou gozaimasu. Sayonara.